Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Planning the Transition to Employment Tips, Tools, and Strategies, presented by Drs. Wendy Parent-Johnson, Laura Owens, and Richard Parent-Johnson. My name is Brianna Humphreys, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I am an Assistant Marketing Manager at Brooks Publishing, who's the proud sponsor for today's webinar. If you're not already a member of the Teaching All Students community, we'd love for you to join. So here's some information about the community now. When you join the Brooks Teaching All Students community, you have access to more webinars like this one and special content and free offers. So you have the link on your screen, and we'll be sure to post it in the chat as well. And we'll revisit it at the end of the webinar, so don't worry about it too much right this second. Speaking of special offers, we are offering a 20% discount on brookspublishing.com when you use the code on your screen. That's edWebPJ. And this includes Wendy, Laura, and Richard's newest release. So we'll share the code again at the end of the webinar, but just keep that in the back of your mind. If you like what you hear today, you can get some more information with their new book. We are also going to be doing a giveaway today. So 3 lucky winners are going to receive a free copy of their new book, Planning the Transition to Employment, which is up on your screen now. The winners will be selected at random from the chat, and we'll announce them at the end of today's webinar. So be sure to post frequently in the chat and stay active, and that'll increase your chances. So without further delay, it's my great pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Dr. Wendy Parent-Johnson is Executive Director of the Sonoran UCEDD, a Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, and Professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of Arizona. She has 37 years experience in the areas of supported and customized employment, transition from school to work, and employment-first policy and practice. Dr. Laura Owens, my apologies, is currently a professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and she's the president of Transcend Inc. Transcend Inc. is an organization based in Maryland that provides direct placement services to individuals with disabilities, develops and evaluates new service models through research of evidence-based practices leading to improved employment outcomes, and provides training and technical assistance to organizations and school districts, focusing on the improvement of educational and employment outcomes for individuals with disabilities. And last but not least, Dr. Richard Parent-Johnson is retired as the Senior Research Associate in the Center for Disabilities in the Sanford School of Medicine at the University of South Dakota. His recent work focuses on systems collaboration and healthcare transitions for young adults with disabilities, including interprofessional medical education and clinical practice. He co-designed and led USD's Center for Disabilities Transition and Action Clinic, and he continues to consult in these areas. So without further ado, welcome Wendy, Laura, and Richard, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, welcome everyone. This is Wendy Parent-Johnson. I'm going to start us off today, and we're really looking forward to having a conversation with you about transition. And it's so exciting to see all the different states represented over in the chat box, and actually some familiar names over there. So we want to share our experiences today, those of other educators and adult service and transition partners out there that we've worked with over the years, and would really like to hear your comments and thoughts and experiences as well. So let's get started here. All right, so when we think about transition, the goal is for everyone, all students, to have employment, post-secondary education, a quality adult life. And when we look at the transition from school to employment and post-secondary education, there's so many different organizations involved in tapping into the adult services and some of the other supports like benefits planning, independent living, and things as the youth begins to make that transition and the family starts stepping back and allowing that individual to be actively involved in leading that journey in their life. The beauty of transition is you do have all of these resources and agencies and organizations focused on it. And that's also the challenge, I'm sure, as all of you know, trying to bring these organizations together and work towards that same goal can sometimes be an asset and sometimes a challenge in trying to make that happen. What we're going to cover today is some information around what is helpful for you to know, what to expect from others in the adult service world, and what you need to do to be able to facilitate that transition from the education side, and share some tools and strategies that we hope will be helpful in that process. So I think one of the key points about transition, it is outcome oriented and future driven. So we want to look at possibilities. This is the time we have opportunities to learn and explore what that goal is, and have the families and the individual tell us what is their dream when that person exits school, employment, post-secondary education, and being involved in their communities. We start with that end in mind. That is our goal. Where do we want to be? And then we use our plan through the years to get there. And each year we can revisit that through the individualized education plan and through the other activities. So we can engage other school personnel that are involved in that individual's education, as well as some of the other partners that are involved with transition as well as we move forward. So another key is to have high expectations. We want to engage and have youth with disabilities active in their transition planning, to provide the opportunities for them to be exposed to all of the choices in their lives, and providing the skills for them to be able to not only make those choices, but to realize those outcomes as they move forward. And that includes all youth, not just a youth without disabilities, and it includes all youth, including those who have significant support needs and maybe more challenges that we need to help in that process. So we want to explore here, not limit. So oftentimes we'll hear that somebody's limitations are due to their disability label or to some challenge that they bring. This isn't the time to do that. Let's explore, figure out what does it take for that person to learn new things, to be able to support them and be able to take on new tasks and new learning opportunities. For example, I oftentimes will hear that this individual can only do one task. So as a result, their goal will be shredding, or it'll be a Walmart greeter. And there's nothing wrong if people want to do these kinds of jobs, but we don't limit them. Let's explore and let's figure out what does it take for them to do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tasks, or being able to change along the way and learn more complex activities. So providing them with those opportunities to learn and experience different activities. And our goal is to start with work. So what we want to do is work as that end outcome. What are the solutions? What do we need to do to address any challenges, address any learning needs, address any supports, so that that person is able to work? Oops, I forgot I got the arrows there. So when we think about this, this has been going on for a long time. Why are we talking about it now? Well, we have a lot of initiatives, and the stars are aligned for all of us that have been in this field for a long time. This is one moment when all of the different agencies that provide policies and legislation are aligned with the same mission and goals focused on transition. And that is because of the high unemployment rates. We still are hovering at 65 to 75% unemployment rates for kids with disabilities as they leave school, and adults that are out there after they've already exited. And so we really want to change that trajectory, and transition is a big chance to do that, to start moving all the next generation of students that leave school with employment as an outcome. So employment first, it's a framework, it's a policy, it's a direction that guides our practices. And every state has some employment first activity, initiative, legislation, executive order, something going on right now. And what this is saying is that employment is the first option. It's what we think of first in our direction in moving forward on everyone receiving publicly funded services that drives how we deliver those services. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, passed in 2014, has really made an incredible difference in transition because it's aligning our workforce systems with education. And further, it expands the vocational rehabilitation's involvement so that they can serve people, students that are eligible or potentially eligible, which opens the door for a lot more students that may not have accessed vocational rehab services while they're in school. And it's also authorizes pre-employment transition services that focus on things like work-based learning, career exploration, self-advocacy training, and work readiness. So the opportunities are much greater, and many of y'all are probably involved with pre-ed services in your states right now. And then the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare home and community-based service regulations, which focus on all students need to have the same opportunities as those individuals not receiving Medicaid, and that they are served in integrated environments. So these initiatives are really pushing the direction and focusing on employment for all youth. And so as the educator, you're the key person at the hub of all this. You bring that expertise on how to teach and the opportunities that are available through what you do as an educator. And so we're going to shift and try sharing some things through the course of the next hour that allow us to move from not just planning, but action planning that's very purposeful, that leads to implementation, that leads to post-school outcomes, so that we're not just checking a box, we're not counting planning as the outcome, but actual true employment and post-secondary and then employment outcomes for individuals that we are teaching or serving. Okay, turn it over to Richard now.
So I'm one of the Johnsons online today. One of the things in our experiences, all three of us and probably many of you, is that transition is a very complicated and multi-layered process, activity, point in life. And there are lots of transitions that we have in life. What our book, it's not a text, what our book really operates from is for a shift to moving away from a model where organizations and people cooperate and actually learn how to collaborate among one another. Most of the time, my experience has been with young adults, especially young adults, who are in high school or junior middle school to high school or high school and beyond. There multiple organizations, multiple people are involved in working with those people, but they cooperate in a way that they do a little bit and then hand off the next step to the next organization. What we really try and emphasize is a model of collaboration where you build support practices in small interprofessional teams that actually commit to working collectively to build and support a set of teaching and learning practices that produce these effective transitions. And where this is one of the themes that's going to show up across everything else we say today, where each student is actively and consistently engaged themselves in activities that build and support their sense of competence in making these transitions. It's one thing to build systems, and it's another thing to put the student, the young adult, the person in the center, to be that person. I know we're going to talk about person-centered planning here at length as we go, but it's really, it's a commonsensical term, but it's vital to the success of these models or these kinds of activities that we want to build. So we're trying to shift from a handoff model of cooperating with one agency, one organization, one teacher to the next teacher, to one that's much more collaborative and much more collective. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. A lot of what I've written about has to do with something called collective impact. There is a couple of professors at Stanford University, John Kanai and Mark Kramer, that have written at length about collective impact activities. And one of the things that I think succinctly identifies that they've identified key elements that if you're going to create a team that acts collectively, not just cooperates with one another, but actually collaborates with one another, acts in a collective effort, you need 5 particular agendas, 5 particular steps. First of all, you need a common agenda. That sounds commonsensical, but I'm going to come back to that one because it's probably the most challenging of them all. You need to do mutually reinforcing activities. You need to work together. Whenever you create a team of people trying to achieve the transition of a young adult or create a transition project or program, you need to work together and do things that out of your comfort zone. So if you're a vocational counselor working with a special ed instructor, you need to go do things together. You need to invite them to participate in your world so they begin to learn how you think, what things are valued in your organizational system, and you need to teach them what are valued things in your system. So you need to work together, not just as a matter of routine, but out of the box. Think about doing things together out of the box so you learn about one another and your organizations. Successful collaborative or collective efforts also require continuous communication. I mean, to say daily is probably not an overstatement. It would be very important to routinely communicate with people who are on the team that you're trying to create to help facilitate a successful transition for these young adults. You also need to come up with shared measures of success. You have to decide up front, what is success going to look like? What will a successful transition mean? And for each of you, each of the people on this collective effort team, that's going to mean something different. You need to decide what success looks like and how you're going to measure it in advance so you can begin. It doesn't have to be quantitative so that you need a research team to come in and back you up. You might want to do that someday if you're running a large project. But shared measures of success are useful to establish up front because intermittently you can come back and say to yourselves over time, are we meeting this? Are we being successful? Are we doing the things that we thought we wanted to achieve? Are they happening? And then a support structure. It's nice to have a coordinator in all this. I know there are transition coordinators and special ed coordinators and special ed teachers and special ed or everything, and people in different organizations. But there needs to be a central focus, a central point where somebody is going to send out the memo, somebody's going to communicate the next directive, or say, okay, the next meeting is, and keep that. You need a little bit of infrastructure. So I want to go back to the common agenda. I can't tell you how many times over the last 35 years I've worked on projects and brought organizations together, and we all thought we were speaking the same language. We all thought transition is transition. That we thought we understood what that term meant, and we assumed that everybody thought the same way we did. Many times, 6 or 8 months, or sometimes even a year into a project, we found that people really didn't share the same definitions of some of the key terms. They didn't have a common agenda. So it's important to really spend some time, and that often emerges, frankly, after you spend time together. Come back and revisit, what is our agenda here? What are the commonalities? Do we use the same terms when we talk about these issues? And do we mean the same things when we use the terms? Okay. Now, one thing I'll say real quickly, the collective impact literature focuses on a more macro level of system of organizations, trying to bring organizations across a city together to achieve a particular end in a collective way. What I've done in high schools and in high school districts is to create a more micro perspective on this, taking these same elements and helping people learn how, just as a teacher, a special ed teacher, a special ed coordinator, a special ed director, and a voc rehab counselor, let's create our own collective, in a micro sense, let's create our own collective effort team. So that's what a lot of what the chapter that I've written for this text is about. Again, and I'll reiterate something, and happily Laura put this in here to remind me to say it multiple times. This is about, it's not about, first you have to bring the team together, but then you need to put the student not in the middle of that team, but on the team. So there are ways that needs to happen. But a lot of the effort that I've spent doing over years is in the classroom, trying to help students themselves become active participants in this process and help teachers learn how to help students become active participants. So one of the projects that is nearest and dearest to my heart, probably spent the most amount of my professional career focused on, had to do with a program, a semester-long course in high school, and that we built to try. Initially, we built this course, a semester-long course for juniors in high school, to try and promote self-determination. The concept and the kind of ideas that self-determination encompasses have been around for a couple of decades. One of the things that we discovered, and this is not a critique of self-determination, this is just a heads up. One of the things that we discovered is that you can't jump into a self-determination course or class or begin discussing self-determination, which we tried to do in high schools for a year, try to discuss self-determination. And what we found is that our young adults did not see themselves as being capable of learning, of being self-determined. So my point here is that, and it's something I talk about routinely, sometimes ad nauseum, self-determination requires a sense of self-efficacy. You can't start self-determination conversations or practices until that young adult believes themselves to be capable of actually doing what they are expected to do, what you expect them to do. So we actually reconstructed, after a whole year, our course to focus much more strongly on helping young adults learn to believe in themselves, learn to believe that they are capable of doing what they were doing, what we were asking them to do. So part of this, the key to these transition activities, to find ways to support and enhance a student's experience of being capable. How do you do that? How do you actually build their sense of efficacy? And in three ways that we focused on a lot over time had to do with modeling what is expected. And modeling is not just a demonstration. For us, modeling is thinking out loud and doing whatever the activity you're asking them to do, but you do it yourself, and you fill in the blanks. You think out loud as you do it. You say, I'm a little worried about my ability to do this. Once they recognize how a person thinks, it's not just a black box. They're not observing your black box and then watching you act out. They're hearing what's going on inside your brain and how you think about the activity that's doing. So modeling is a little more than just simple demonstration. We also did a lot of role-playing activities, and this in particular is valuable. Students need to practice doing some of these activities that we talk about being self-determined. They need to practice being they need to practice having a face-to-face conversation with a potential employer. But not only do they need to practice, so we would role play and build this as a part of our course weekly. We're doing some kind of role playing weekly with individuals. But it's not just them being the person being interviewed. We put them in the person of being the interviewer. And often when they flip the place that they participated in, where they were, sometimes they were the interviewee and sometimes they were the interviewer, they learn how to do that much more effective, how to understand what is involved in this conversation when they get to play both sides of the conversation. Um, Probably the third thing that I would want to emphasize, and then I'm going to hand. These are just key activities or strategies that we've had great success with. The University of Kansas Center for Research on Learning developed something years ago called elaborated feedback. I'm getting a signal here. So elaborated feedback. I want you to think about elaborated feedback is actually much more than just telling people how they did. It has a set of steps that you can do, and I'd be happy to elaborate on what elaborated feedback is later in the program. That's
All
over
right.
to Laura.
So this just sort of builds on what Richard was talking about and what Wendy had sort of done in the intro is person-centered planning. Some of the questions that I was looking at is, what does self-determination look like? It looks different in every student's individualized plan. But what we need to understand is that person-centered planning is really a process-oriented approach where the student really is the person in charge. They're the person in the lead. They define the directions of where we need to go. They invite the people who should attend their meetings. So in an individualized transition plan, when you look at person-centered planning, it really does lead to greater inclusion and individuals, students, and young adults with disabilities to be true parts of their community and society. So, for example, in an ITP, having a student run their own IEP meeting, having them actually lead their own IEP meeting, having that student, regardless of the severity of their disability, decide who comes to their IEP meeting. They get to choose which general education teacher. They get to research the adult service agencies in their area and decide which person or which agency should come. So the idea of person-centered planning can come in a variety of ways. So it could come in self-directed IEPs. It could come in the discovery process where you're doing work-based learning, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then it could come in an actual formalized person-centered planning meeting that could then result in that student's IEP or that individualized transition planning meeting. So when we look at evidence-based practices or best practices in person-centered discovery and planning, it really is about discovering the students' passions, skills, interests, abilities, and focusing on the whole picture. I think a lot of times, special education and rehabilitation were based in the model. So that's the opposite of what we're talking about when we talk about spending time with the person and really putting that person in the center of everything we're doing. And I love this quote from John O'Brien that we have in the book that talks about person-centered planning doesn't ignore the disability. So we're not talking about, just saying, well, this person's going to lead their own IEP and there it is. We're saying you still need to look at the disability, but look at it in perspective, look at it in context. So really say, yes, in fact, they do have a disability. That's why we have a job. That's why we are employment consultants or transition coordinators or special ed teachers. But then let's put it in context. Then what do we need to do and shift it over so that we're looking at the capacities and passions of that person and really building their social capital? Because that, I think, is another key piece when it comes to person-centered planning, is really building an individual's whole life, not just part of their life, but looking at who do they spend time with. And you'd be surprised that when you build that social capital, how that social capital leads to all kinds of transition and employment opportunities for youth. So our services and supports should be based on the dreams and interests and preferences of that individual student. And we may think that it's not realistic. We may think that that's not the best route for this person to go, but I always put myself in the shoes of the folks that I work with. And if somebody tells me I can't, the first thing I do is I put my heels in and I say, yes, I can, and I'm going to do it. So we tend to then not allow that for people with disabilities. And so the person should be able to dream, and they should be the person then who decides, yes, that's something I want to do, or no, that's not something I want to do. And failure should be an option, which we'll talk about a little bit later too. But I think too many times we put people with disabilities in this bubble, and I think families tend to do that too, because you don't want to see a young adult with a disability hurt or feel badly. But the reality is, in the harsh, cruel adult world, that is what happens. So the person with a disability should be included from soup to nuts. They should be in charge, saying, here's what I want to do. And they should be part of that planning and empowered to lead their IEP, to invite those people to those person-centered planning meetings. And they should be then allowed to really make their own choices and decisions that are based on information. So, we might provide some work-based learning experiences, or we might provide some job shadowing experiences so that a student can actually make a meaningful, informed choice about things. So when we look at the individual being the driving force, we are asking questions like, what is the individual's gift? What are their strengths? What are their talents and passions? What currently works for the individual? Are there systems in place? Are there supports in place that actually help the student now that might be able to be something that could be incorporated into the adult world, into employment? And what doesn't work? Are there things that we have in place that sometimes we just say, well, this is what we have to offer the student? And the reality is it doesn't really work, but it's all we have. So we just continue with it. So are there things that don't work that we need to maybe stop? How does the individual learn best? Using Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. Do they learn best by doing, by seeing, by tasting, by smelling, by visualizing? What works for that person and how do they learn best? What are the things that the individual needs the most help with? And then who can help them now, currently? And could that person help them in the future as well? And then finally, identify the people who are close to the individual, and ask the student, who would you like to invite? When I've done self-directed IEPs, I found that it's just so powerful and it's really person focused because the individual gets to invite the people they want, they get to introduce the people, they get to talk about their own goals, they get to talk about their own present levels of performance. And so when the person gets to invite people who they know in their social circle, whether that's, I was in an IEP meeting the other day where I had a young person who invited the security guard from the hallway because he spent most of his time in the hallway. So the person he felt who knew him best was the security guard in the high school. But these are the people who know the person, they care about the person, and they can contribute really important information to the meeting, and also connect that person to people and experiences in the community as well. So one of the things we talk about in the book is called a positive personal profile. And it's part of our discovery process that we do. And we do it in high school, we do it in middle school. You build upon it. So it's not a tool that you do and then put it away, but it really looks at a variety of things like the dreams and goals of the person, the interests of the person, their talents, their skills, their knowledge, the support system that they currently have, the support system that we can create, accommodations and solutions to challenges the person might already have, and what's already there for that individual. What are their dislikes? So not only what do they like, but what do they not like? What's not working for them? Looking at positive personality traits, looking at temperament. Do they like to be alone? Do they like people? Do they like things? Do they like data? What are those things? Again, the learning style for the person. Are there specific challenges? And then let's put those specific challenges in context. Why are there specific challenges? What kinds of life and work experiences does the student bring into this positive personal profile? They have a variety of life experiences that we may not really know about. And so how can we utilize those life and work experiences to help the student plan for their future? What are their values? I worked with a young person who was a Jehovah Witness, and so they really valued their time when they would canvass the neighborhood, and they did it on certain days at certain times, and so that was really important to him, something that he valued and his family valued. Are there environmental preferences? Does the person like being inside or outside? Do they like to stand? Do they like to sit? And then from there, we create kind of this Venn diagram where we pull like 3 key pieces of information that we can create different possibilities and ideas that we can sort of build into that next step, which is the job development part. And to us, I think the biggest thing is to really look at that person and spend a lot of time with that person. I know one of the questions that came up when Wendy and Richard were talking was we're looking at the rural areas and the transportation issues, and by using a positive personal profile, you can really identify some creative things that maybe you didn't think about because it was never a question to be asked, or it was never something that was really right there on the table, the elephant in the room, so to speak. So when we do positive personal profiles, a lot of times we find solutions to transportation issues, or we find solutions because that person that was invited to the person-centered planning meeting knows somebody who can help in those different areas. So the positive personal profile can be used to help develop resumes, to kind of narrow job opportunities or employment opportunities, to help individuals prepare for interviews, because you want to sell a student's features. What can they bring to a business? And by developing a positive personal profile, you can really identify what are those, am I going to? What are those important areas? And then develop the goals for their ITP or their education plan. Or identify more work experiences. Maybe they're interested in a certain area, and identify those more work experiences. And then again, turn those features into benefits. This is just real quick. This is an example of a positive personal profile. This is Shonda, 17-year-old with an intellectual disability. These are the things that her teachers note: that she's not a candidate for employment because she's lazy, has difficulty focusing on tasks, is consistently late getting to class, has frequent absences. And then when you go to the school and interview and observe Shonda, she doesn't make eye contact. She doesn't answer questions. She often just shrugs her shoulders. And you observe her falling asleep in class. Her teachers say that she never completed a career assessment and that her homework is rarely completed or turned in. This is actually the real person's name. But Shonda's mother has not attended any IEP meetings or conferences. And so what we did then is we did a positive personal profile. And we looked at Shonda's features, which are: she was very hardworking, she was neat and organized, she had attention to her appearance, she was very social, very responsible. And then what would be the benefits to a manager of a retail store, which is where she wanted to do her work experience.
Okay, thank you. So now that we've talked about all of this kind of general framework that, of how we conduct transition, let's get into the specifics activities as we're moving forward. So transition, when we apply all of what we've been talking about, our question shifts. We don't want to know, can this student work? We get rid of that. So what we want to know is, how can we help this student work? So I get asked all the time, what can an individual with, and you can fill in the blank, individual with autism, individual with Down syndrome, individual with Prader-Willi, what can they do? And I challenge you to think about anybody can work. And let's look beyond that disability label, and let's look beyond any limitations that follow that student that we often will see, because so often descriptions focus on those behaviors or those negative attributes about somebody. So let's look at how can we help this student go to work. And when we do that, when we shift this question, our role becomes different. We're trying to find out information. We want to know more and more about that individual, and we have the years while they're in school to do that. So as we are applying these opportunities, these transition experiences, all the information we want to collect is those specific elements that relate to that person. And Laura covered some of these in the person-centered planning process. And all of these pieces are sources of information. When we are out there observing them in different work environments, when we are seeing them in the community, in other classrooms, in activities at school and extracurricular activities, talking with people, we find out all of this information that contributes to the portfolio that helps us really do a good job at employment. So what do they like? What are their interests? How do they learn best? And what supports are helpful to them? And I always like to focus on, as Laura mentioned, what works. What is it that really is helpful to that person? And you've got the opportunity now to test those different things. One of the other aspects is we often have somebody, they do something, they demonstrate that they can do something, and then we don't give opportunities to practice. And I'll have so often somebody will say, well, they tell time, but they don't really know how to use the clock in a work environment to take break or to move to the next task. So practice what it really means to apply these assets that you're talking about. And another, I think, critical piece that we often forget are, what are the work environment preferences? Do they want a busy workplace? Do they want a quiet workplace? Do they, when we look at offices, for example, you can have an office that's really busy, or you can have one where everybody is in their own space. So not just a job type, but what is the qualitative aspect of those different jobs that are important to that person? And as we all know, it makes a huge difference in our own jobs about those different aspects that define even a job of the same title. And then what do they need to make those connections? How do we get people to the employers out there? And that's on us with connecting people to those opportunities that broaden their network, and that includes employers. So one of the things that we do know, the best predictor of employment is paid employment while people are in school. Work experiences, any activity that focuses on getting people into real work environments, it results in better employment outcomes when people graduate and exit school. So let's look at work-based learning experiences. I noticed a lot of comments in the chat box about Project Search, and that's an excellent example of an internship that is a validated process. It's a work-based internship program that started out at Cincinnati Hospital. They have, I believe it's over 700 sites now, and some of you were talking about wanting to start a site, which you can do that. And this allows their employment rate following participation is at 70% right now. I was on a call yesterday, I think she said 75 was the absolute most recent. So looking at businesses in the school, I've worked with some schools that have a coffee business or a bake shop or a cookie business where the students themselves run that business. On-the-job training where it could be paid employment, or people are doing work-based learning experiences, a different variety of opportunities to try different jobs and to participate under different work environments and conditions. tapping into the career and technical education programs that are already in the school and helping to support students with disabilities to participate in them. And I often hear from many of the teachers that it's really challenging to build community work experiences into the school day. And after school programs and summer work programs are also often another way for people to get that experience. And we're working with our state voc rehab now to build those into the system here under the pre-ed services. So that's an opportunity as well. And this is just an example to show you with the different work-based learning. We want to explore a wide range, variety, different types of jobs and different experiences that start with more career exploration, different exposure, different opportunities such as apprenticeships and internships and work experiences that are very broad. And as people start deciding what it is that they want to do and making those choices, the self-determination we talked about, then we can get more specific into longer and a focus area of a work experience. This is often too a way for students to begin to learn a work ethic. They're exposed to expectations of work and other people who teach them those skills. And this I found to be a really big influence for families. I saw a lot of comments about families really getting on board. And when they can see that their son or daughter is out working and you share this information with them and you share the updates and all of the competencies that they're demonstrating and what they can do, that often can change the perspectives of the challenges that many of y'all have quoted over there. And a tool that we found to be really helpful is, and this is another one that can focus on students helping and participating actively in their career exploration and work experience. So in this particular case, the individuals are looking at, do they like, is this okay, or they don't like things like the workplace, the people, the job duties, the overall job, would they like to work there or not? And it can be very, very enlightening to gather this information every time a student is in a job shadowing or a work experience. And I found this to be a really helpful tool that families can use when they go out and visit a store or a movie theater or a business and really get some feedback. And together these can start creating a portfolio of a picture of those things that somebody likes and dislikes about a job site. Now I'll give it back to Laura.
So work-based learning experiences lead to customized employment, and really, what we're talking about is transition to competitive integrated employment. And some of the comments, that I was looking at, also we were talking about unrealistic and high expectations, and again, I think that what we're trying to get across is that. There is really nothing that's unrealistic. I think that what we have to do is help people understand, can they do this and what supports do they need? And that's where customized employment comes in. I think that it's up to people to decide. I mean, there are things that I did when I was growing up that I probably shouldn't have, even tried, because it really wasn't my skill set, but I thought I wanted to do it. And then I wasn't successful and I moved on to something different. So customized employment really is about looking at the discovery stuff that we talked about earlier, the passion, skills, interests, abilities of the individual, and then moving into the business to develop that business relationship, that employer relationship, to look at where there are job tasks that we might be able to reassign or restructure or create to match the skills of the student with whom we're working. But the key with customized employment is that any customized employment opportunities that we develop have to help the employer's operation. So there's a balance between, here's what the student or young adult can do, and then here's what the employer needs. And so then we are kind of the middleman making that good job match. So when we talk about employer relationships, so our section in the book on employer relationships, one of the things that's important to understand is that sometimes we think that we're the enemy and he is us. What employers want to hear is that we represent motivated candidates who want to work in their business, and that our candidates, our students, have skill sets that can add value to their business, and that we're there to assist the business with solutions to improve the company's productivity or their workflow or their customer service satisfaction. We're not there to sell a challenge or a problem by going in and saying, I work with a student who has significant disabilities and they can't do this and they can't do that. And can we pull something together? It really is about, I've got students who are really interested in this particular industry. So taking that positive personal profile, creating that Venn diagram that identifies key areas, and then building from there to find out what the business needs so that we can actually provide business solutions. So the hardest thing, I think, is how do you identify employers and businesses to start working with? And the first thing that we recommend is to start with your own personal and professional networks. There's Joe Girard wrote a book years ago about the fact that we all have 250 people in our personal sphere of influence. So basically, we all know 250 people that would come to our wedding or our funeral. And so that's kind of where we need to start. And not just with ourselves, but with our colleagues, with our families, with our students, with our students' families. Everybody has people that they know in their personal and professional networks. And, one time I did a positive personal profile with a young adult who invited his neighbor, who actually knew much more about him than his mom even knew. Like, he had gone over there after school to help her with her laundry and to help her with her dishes. And the mom was shocked that he would do that. And so he was building his own personal network. Also understanding that everybody in your organization, everybody in your school is potentially a job developer. We all go grocery shopping. We all get our hair done. We all go to the dry cleaners or the coffee shop. So we all know people that could potentially be employers or even just find work experiences for the students we're working with. Looking at families and friends and neighbors and linking to other social networking sites. Developing a Facebook page for youth that's a private Facebook page that you can work on. And then once you identify those the businesses, then you go in with the student sometimes, or maybe without initially, and you conduct an informational interview. And the informational interview is really just an informational gathering tool. And that's why sometimes you can bring a student along. Sometimes you might go by yourself, but it's really just getting to know. And there's a sample in the book of what, questions you can ask and the tool itself. But the question you don't want to ask is, do you have any jobs? That's not what we're asking in an informational interview. The informational interview is really about, I want to know more about your company and I want to know more about your needs. What's important to you and how can we be a solution to help your business improve and do better things. So informational interviews helps you get that foot in the door, because if you go in there saying, I work with people with disabilities and I'm looking for jobs for them, the first thing an employer is going to say is thanks, but no thanks. So an informational interview is a way for you to get your foot in the door. It is low pressure. I just want to know about your business. And I'll tell you, I've never had an employer who said, I don't want to talk about my business. Employers love talking about their business. It's a way for you to make a first impression, a good first impression to that business, so that they see you as a person. So you're developing that relationship rather than, okay, I need to get this student a job, but let's develop a relationship and start talking about what their needs are and how they got into the business. And then you can start thinking about your students and who might be a good match for that. And you can uncover all the possible opportunities that might be available for your students. So during that informational interview, you might want to find out things like, what are they known for? What are they most proud of? As you're sitting in the hallway waiting for the person to talk to, you can see, what do they have posted on their walls, and, what kinds of things do they have around their lobby that you can sort of talk about. What are the skill sets that are required? What do the people look like and need in terms of the skills? Are there productivity or operational challenges that we might be able to come in and assist with? Are there trends like, it's back to school, so all the college students are gone and now we don't have anybody left? Or I was just in South Carolina a couple weeks ago, and they said we have a 1% unemployment rate, and in our hospitality industry, we can't get anybody to work. So are there unemployment issues so that they can't find workers? And is there an opportunity for us to help our students? Are there seasonal issues? Holidays are coming up, so employers are hiring now. So are there opportunities there? Are there ways that we could maybe improve the workflow? Maybe, we're really good as special educators to be able to go in and say, you know what, if you organize it this way, people are much better they'll be able to do this much more efficiently. There might be opportunities where you go in and say, if you move this over here and this over there, this whole process would flow a lot easier. And are there employees that are bogged down with important but, quote, non-essential tasks? In other words, are there people who are surgeons who have high level skills doing entry level kinds of tasks? And are there opportunities to customize employment opportunities from there? Are there core staff to struggle and manage their workloads? Are there things we can take from them so that they could manage their workloads? And are there unhappy customers? And then, and just general problem areas altogether. I could just talk about this forever. Sorry, Wendy.
We're almost at our hour. We've got 3 minutes left, so I'm just trying to. Yeah.
So this is from the book, but Steps to Negotiating Employment. So you all can take a look at that. But make sure you make the ask. This is what I see, and I've got a candidate, and I'd really love to help you out with that.
So as we're looking and doing all of that negotiation through those relationships that Laura mentioned, we're looking at the individual skills and the employer's job functions, and we make that match. And when we do, we're often going to match on many of the tasks that the person's able to do when they start the job. Others, they're going to need training, others support. Some may not be a match, and we need to negotiate. And I think it's important to just lay this out, because I often see that people are put into a job, and because they match on one element, then no support is provided, or because they don't match on something, then they're considered not employable for that position. So that's our role, and by definition, individuals are going to need some assistance. So once we get the job, let's look at what do we need to do. There's going to be those gaps, and we need to apply that knowledge that we do in the classroom into the community settings. And this is when it's a work experience or when it's employment, looking at the tools that we have. And we have so many things that we can use, like checklists. Technology, mainstream technology like an iPhone or iPod can be so helpful to put visual images and task analyses and things for people to use. The task analysis is such a useful tool for us. It helps us know when the student is learning, but I think more importantly, it helps us make data-based decisions about where supports and accommodations might be needed, or how we may need to change our instructional strategy to make sure that we are being effective in helping that individual learn to do the job, and that we're not overtraining. That's often a mistake, that we'll just keep going because we think that the person needs us, when the data actually shows that they're doing it independently. So I think, kind of in summary, don't forget, we want to promote a work ethic through all of these experiences that we are talking about. We want to teach self-determination so that people are actively involved in making choices. including that workplace culture, because there's such a variety of differences that different jobs and businesses have to offer. And then what can we do to create opportunities that open the doors that the students we are working with have the experience and the practice to know what is expected of them in the adult world. Put them in those environments, let them learn from those experiences, and identify the supports that allow them to be successful. So what's next? So, you know, when we may be involved, it may be a work experience. It may be that we actually find employment before they leave school. We need to engage the adult services and the community supports that are available regardless. We need to advocate. I've seen comments there, and I go to meeting and I get phone calls daily from families. My son or daughter graduated. A teacher says my student graduated and they are sitting at home. We need to follow through, and that's why I say advocate, not just refer and assume it's going to happen, but follow up, advocate, talk about the person's assets, make sure they get connected to those essential supports, share the information. We do it in a portfolio or a very brief summary, because the feedback we often get are these long, big folders are not useful. But talk about what works and share that, because you're the expert, and the education system has had the opportunity to explore these things, and it can be a real benefit to adult service systems that don't have that opportunity to do that. And you share your assistance and expertise. As Richard mentioned, that was one of the beauties of his model, was that not only did the voc rehab counselor come into the classroom, the teacher went out to the jobs that were found through the voc rehab or supported employment providers. And then making sure that long-term assistance is in place for success. If you found the job, connect and make sure they have that service and support to help them in the future. If you didn't find the job, but you provided all these work experiences and you're referring them for those services, make sure that you have them connected for this so that they do experience success. And I think most importantly is advancement in their careers. These are their first jobs. That doesn't mean it's their lifelong place that they're going to stay employed. So how do we help people think through the processes that we just applied as they gain those experiences and move up the career ladder? Laura, it's you.
So I will go quickly through this, but avoiding the yes buts. I think that, what we were thinking here is that, as human beings, we often have what's called, it's a natural negative bias. We have a tendency to look at the glasses half empty versus the glasses half full. So it really is about providing opportunities and trying things and allowing students to be successful, but also to fail, and then learning from those failures as well. I know that, when I work with our team, they'll say, oh man, this work experience just didn't work out, and it was a failure. And nothing is ever a failure if you learn from it. And so, that's what we were trying to get across with this chapter, is that oftentimes we'll say things like, yes, but my student has severe disabilities. I couldn't do this because my school does this, or my this. And so we wanted people to think differently about that, and use those yes buts as opportunities to ask additional questions. So I live in a rural community, and so as a result, we don't have a lot of transportation. As a result, there aren't a lot of businesses. All right, how can I now take that as an opportunity? An opportunity to, for example, work with a young man who really loves dogs, not cats, but dogs. And so we worked with vocational rehabilitation to develop a traveling dog washing service. So he purchased a van, and we retrofitted it, and he hired a job coach through Social Security work incentives, and now he has this traveling dog washing service that he goes to places where people can then wash their dogs in his van versus having to do it in their house. So how can you change that thought process to, okay, this is where I am, but instead of a yes, but a yes, and how can we ask those questions that'll kind of reframe our thinking into things a little differently? Because sometimes we have students with a variety of abilities, and that's what we really need to look at. It's not the IQ score, it's not the disability, it's not the fact that they have dyslexia or they have ADHD or whatever. That doesn't matter. What matters is what can we build on with that student, and how can these situations be reframed, and what else can we do to help things move forward? And then finally, we put together this tool called the ITAP, which we've been using, called Implementing Transition Action Plan. And the focus is really on us as professionals to kind of think differently. And the areas of focus are, you can do employment, residential, recreation, but it helps us kind of stay focused to what's the current status. What is our vision? What would we like to see? What are our personal goals to move transition forward? So that action planning that Wendy talked about at the very beginning, this was our attempt at saying, how do we move transition forward? Well, maybe we as professionals also need to have a transition action plan. Who can we collaborate? Who else can we bring to the table? Whether you're in a urban or rural area, there's other people in the community that maybe we need to sort of bring to the table, like, SCORE or Evoke Rehab or a business teacher or a parent liaison. And then what are those action steps? What do we want to see happen with that collaboration? And then what are some strategies that I might encounter? So those yes, but questions. And then how do we reframe those questions? So people are too busy to meet. Well, maybe we could consider a Zoom or a video conference call instead of having everybody come to the table and meet. And so those are some things that we've thought of for the transition action plan. And we have a couple examples in the book. So, okay. Thank you. And questions and answers, I guess, if we have time.
Thanks so much for a great presentation, everyone. I want to be respectful of everyone's time today, so I think we can just cover a couple questions and answers, and then maybe we can follow up with the remaining questions in our forum, so I can reach out and we can provide written answers. So, people who have to leave can just check the EdWeb community later. But before we get into the Q&A, I want to announce our winners really quickly. Our winners today the new book are Cynthia Inlow, Kelby Katz, and Kimberly Bunch. So I will be reaching out to the three of you individually separately, and congratulations. For everybody else, I want to make sure that we write down the 20% discount code. It's EdWebPJ if you want to save 20% on planning the transition to employment, and that's valid through the end of December. So feel free to take advantage of that offer, and it's good on anything on the Brooks Publishing website in addition, so feel free to take a look. So I guess we can just jump into the Q&A now. So we had a lot of questions about parent involvement, and one question that came up a few times is, how do you get parental involvement with realistic career exploration options?
So I think for parents, I think we need to meet everybody where they are. And I think that we need to think about what is making that unrealistic. Like, what are the parents thinking that the student is able to do that we're not seeing that they're able to do? And so, maybe it's unrealistic to us, but maybe there's a reason. So I think having that conversation, why do they think that this student can do that? I mean, I know that I was just someplace where somebody had a very similar thing where the parent thought that this student was going to be able to be, I don't know, an or something. And, so then we had this conversation with the parent, and it turned out really what they were doing is identifying all the strengths that the student had. And that was the only job that they thought of that would sort of balance the student's interests and skills. But I feel like, we don't want to dismiss parents, but we think we need to have that open conversation with parents about why do they think that this is important, and then maybe give it a try. Maybe have students go out and try whatever it is that the family thinks is important, and see, because sometimes students will surprise you, or sometimes the student will go, I don't like to do that, and then the choice is made by the student. I don't know if Wendy or Richard has other options.
No, I just want to add, I think oftentimes families react that way because of their previous experiences. The people that came before you may have, told them things. And so I do agree that where people are, and it takes time. I think of a really good example that this dad did not want his son to go to work. We had the job, we were all ready while he was in school. So we went to his home and sat down and, just talking about all of the strengths that his son had, and what was the issues, and, things. And it turned out that the father was a mechanic who had injured himself and could no longer be a mechanic. He had damaged his hands, and that was what he wanted his son to do, but the job wasn't in that area. And then the other factor that was really upsetting him was that his wife had died, and it was him and his son, and they enjoyed spending time together, and he didn't want to lose that. So we found a job as a mechanic assistant where dad could then be the consultant, could meet him for lunch, and they could chat about the business, and really changed all of that perspective. So I think it really helps, and just to reinforce some of the things that Laura mentioned there.
I also think for teachers who are involved in classroom settings and trying to get parents, I saw several comments about parents not showing up for IEPs, not
Mhm.
engaged at all, or being the only one that's engaged and having all the answers, and the student doesn't get to participate. I think it's important, and I said this in the chat box. Try and find ways, creative ways, to engage parents beyond the IEP. I mean, if we had activities. Now we had classroom activities where the vocation in high school, early high school, not late, not senior year, but sophomore and junior year. Uh, Classroom activities where the coordinator, the teacher, and the voc rehab counselor created planned extracurricular activities where the kids that they were working with came together and the parents were invited. So you find ways beyond the classroom to engage parents and engage them also. And I think that I made this comment in the chat box as well. That job observation tool is one we use. Wendy created it in one context, and I stole it from her, and then asked permission later, and used it in the coursework with students. We would have young adults go out, high school age kids, and use that tool not just for job assessment, for all kinds of assessment. What do I like this? Maybe if I think about another school I'm going to, or an employment, or shopping, they use that assessment tool in creative ways, and it's very, hopefully, more universally designed than most tools that you'll see. So kids of all different abilities can use that tool, but if they use it in collaboration with their parents, it can be a conversation tool. It can be something that generates a conversation about a focus. You're focused on a particular question. You have your points of view. You document why you like it, why you don't like it, what would make it different, what would make it better. And those things, those kinds of conversations can be used, and should be used throughout 2 or 3 years in preparation for the big transition. So you're trying to set the stage where there's a mutual, and then parents have a chance to begin to respect their kid as an active participant. If they're forced to, allow them that space. One of the things we use in a medical healthcare transition clinic we've done for years, is that we bring the parent and the young adult into into a closed medical conversation setting in a doctor's office, and we say in advance, we're going to address the young adult in this conversation. The first question, every question is asked of them. If they need help, then we'll come over to you. So we put the kid, the young adult, in the driver's seat over and over again. And it's been fascinating to watch parents. It may take an hour or two to begin to yield the floor and recognize that their kid does have answers if you just create the space for them to operate in. So we're trying to create opportunities and spaces for kids to operate and to demonstrate so that they learn to be self-determined. Anyway, long answer, but it's actually just the beginning.
No, I think there was a lot of great information there. Thank you all so much. I think for the sake of time, I'll just follow up with you all separately with the Q&As, and we can post the answers in the EdWeb forum, just so that way we can just move along a little bit. But I just want to thank everybody so much who's attended today. I know everybody is very busy, and we appreciate you spending your time with us to learn more about the transition process and how we can get everybody transitioned into an employment situation. So I just want to thank Wendy, Laura, and Richard for this excellent webinar and all the information they've provided today. For anyone who isn't already a member of the Teaching All Students community, we'd love for you to join. You have access to more webinars like this one, and you'll also see additional recordings, online discussions, and other exclusive offers. So on behalf of Brooks Publishing, EdWeb, Wendy, Laura, and Richard, thank you so much for attending today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.